Hello, in this video I'm going to show you how you can make this really simple looping ball animation with little to no effort required. This technique is used in cloth simulations, but don't worry if you've never used them before, as they're pretty intuitive. With that being said, this isn't a beginner tutorial as such, so if you're brand new to Blender I recommend going to make a donut or two first. And with that out of the way, here's a quick summary of everything we're going to be doing in the video for people that are a little more experienced. First of all, we're going to start by making a quad sphere to ensure that the ball deforms properly each time that it bounces. We're then going to set up a simple backdrop with some cubes in front for the ball to bounce off of. Next, we're going to look at adding a cloth simulation to the ball and collisions to the cubes and going over the settings quickly. We will then tweak the boxes to make sure that the ball is bouncing where we want it and make sure that the camera is following nicely. And finally, we'll finish off the scene with some lighting and textures on all our objects before rendering it out. So with the quick rundown over and done with, let's get straight into it. So to start with, open Blender, delete everything, and then add a default cube back again. We're going to be animating the ball with a quad sphere because that's going to ensure that the ball deforms properly every time that it bounces. If you was to use a UV sphere, every time that it would bounce on either end, you would quite clearly see that it's a UV sphere. Making a quad sphere is really easy. All you need to do is go over to your modifiers, add a subdivision surface, and I'm going to put 3 subdivisions on mine. You can go with 2 if you want, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Now with the subdivision on, I'm going to apply it straight away. And already this looks okay, but if you come to the orthographic view, you can see that it's like squashed on all sides. So all we need to do is go into edit mode, and I'm going to hit Alt, Shift, and S, and that is going to put me in the 2-sphere mode, I guess. If I drag my mouse out, you can see that the ball is becoming more of a ball. And if you don't want to use the hotkey, you can just press F3 and look for 2-sphere, if you can spell it. So now with a perfectly spherical quad sphere, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade smooth, and I'm going to add another 2 subdivision surfaces just to round it all off nicely. Okay, so that's the quad sphere setup. I'm now going to add a plane, scale it up by 2. Going to go into edit mode, grab this back edge, and just drag it all the way up so that we've got something to work with as a backdrop. I am also really quickly just going to apply the rotation and scale, grab this back edge, bevel it with a few segments, shade auto smooth, and scale it out on the X a little bit so that it definitely fills up all of the camera. Next, I'm going to grab my sphere, move it up a bit, and scale it down. The reason that I'm scaling it down is I've noticed that the cloth simulations work a lot better on smaller spheres. Not really sure why, but it is what it is. Once you've scaled down the sphere, you're going to want to apply the rotation and scale, and this is really important because you're adding a cloth simulation to it. The cloth simulation is all physics based, so the ball needs to be the correct scale in the 3D world, if you get what I'm saying. If not, it can lead to just inaccuracies with how the ball should act. Next, I'm going to start adding my cubes for the ball to bounce off of. So I'm just going to add a cube, scale it down, scale it out on the y-axis, something like this. Scale it down a little bit more. And I'm going to come into side orthographic view and put it somewhere roughly where I want the ball to hit it to start with. So around here. Just an important note, when it comes to rotating your objects, make sure that you're either in orthographic scale or that you're rotating it on the correct axis. Because if I rotated this like this, for example, it's then going to bounce off of this cube and go somewhere over here, and obviously that's not what we want. We're just wanting it to bounce off of one object to another, to another, to another, and then down into a hole at the bottom. So with that being said, I'm going to go back to it being around here somewhere. So to start with, I'm going to apply the rotation and scale, and I'm going to add a bevel modifier. I'm going to turn the bevel modifier all the way down and add some more segments just to make it look nicer. Now we have our first cube set up, our sphere set up, and our backdrop. But if I press play, nothing's happening, and obviously that's because we haven't applied any simulations yet. So first of all, I'm going to select my sphere, and I'm going to come over to my physics tab, and I'm just going to add a cloth simulation. Now if I press play, you can see that the ball is dropping, but there's no collisions set up, so it's not going to collide with anything. So to add collisions, I'm just going to select my cube, add a collision on my physics tab, go to my backdrop, add a collision. Oh, I already added one. And now if I press play, you can see that the ball will hit the objects and will actually react to it. which is what we want, but we don't want this. So to stop the ball looking like a plastic bag, all we have to do is click the ball, go into our cloth settings, go all the way down, and I'm going to add pressure here. Now the pressure is really simple. If I just put a value of 5, press play, you'll be able to see what it's doing. It will hit the object, but then it's trying to expand back to its original shape. Now obviously the pressure settings are way too low, but before I start messing with the pressure settings, it's really important that you get your quality steps to what you want them at. For this animation, I'm just going to do them at 10. I mean, 10 is good enough anyway, but you might want to go a little bit higher if your computer can handle it. So with the quality set up to 10, you can see the animation's dropping slower now, but when it does hit, you can see there's a lot more detail in the cloth. There's a lot more wrinkles in it and everything, which is perfect. That's really good. If you set up your pressure settings and then change your quality steps, it's going to seem like the pressure has changed. It's not. It's just that it's being calculated more accurately. So just keep it in mind about the quality steps before you start playing with the pressure. However, now I have my quality steps set up to what I want it to be, I can start playing with the pressure. Now there's two ways you can go about adding pressure. You could just add a ridiculous number into here, like 500, press play, and yeah, it's starting to work. However, the issue with this is you start putting ridiculous numbers in here and it makes it really hard to narrow down. So what I like to do is I set mine to 100 and I come down to this pressure scale and I just turn this up. So if I press 2 on this, it's obviously just going to double the pressure within. As you can see, if I set that back to 1, it folds and flops a lot more with the pressure set at 1. But for this, I want the ball to be quite firm, so I'm going to set mine to about 5, see what that's like. 5 is good, but it's still a little too bouncy for what I like, so I'm going to set it up to 10. I'm liking the look of this set to 10 a lot more. It looks more like a bouncy ball and less like a water balloon with not so much water in. So now that I have my first collision object set up and my cloth simulation set up, I'm going to add a camera, and the reason that I'm adding a camera now is just to make sure that it all follows nicely. So I'm going to add in a camera with the camera selected. I'm going to hit F3 and search for clear rotation. It's already there, so I'm just going to press enter. Now I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis by 90 degrees, move it back on the y-axis, and move it up on the z-axis into place. Now I'm going to press 0 on my numpad so that I can come into camera view, move the camera up to roughly where I want it. Now I'm just going to move the camera back on the z-axis a bit so that we've got a lot more in frame. And yeah, I'm happy with that. Now before we actually get started with this, I just want to make sure that the ball is starting well above the camera so that we can't see it in the first frame, and this is going to make it so that we can loop it. So with this setup, now we can actually get to the part of making, well, the rest of the animation, and it's really simple. All we're going to do is we're going to come into the orthographic view and we're just going to duplicate cubes, watch where the ball goes. So scrubbing through, see where it goes, about there. So I will put my cube here, so that it's going to bounce off that, bounce off there, bounce down here, I imagine. So all I'm doing here is just watching the animation back, just waiting for it to calculate so that I can move things into place better. And this is a little tedious, but this is literally as hard as the whole process gets. It's not even really hard, it's just tedious. Now, a big old elephant in the room is the fact that the ball isn't actually hitting anything, and it's really painfully obvious that it's not hitting anything. So we're going to fix that really quickly. We're going to go into the cloth simulation settings, and we're going to scroll all the way down to, say, collisions. Now with the collisions quality steps, it's exactly the same with the quality steps for the cloth. It's just going to calculate the collisions a hell of a lot better. So I'm going to set mine up to 10, as, you know, it's kind of a key point of the animation, collisions. And the distance, I'm going to set this down to 0.001, and I'm pretty sure that is the lowest value you can put in distance for the cloth simulation anyway. Now if I go back, press play, wait for it to simulate, it's going to be slower, but is what it is. You can see that it's not actually done much, and that's because these cubes need the thickness outer value turning down on them. So what I'm going to do to edit all these quickly is I'm going to shift click all my cubes and the backdrop, everything with a collision on. I'm going to go to thickness outer, and holding Alt, I'm going to click on it. When you hold Alt, it affects all of the objects that you've got selected. So for example, if I didn't hold Alt and I just changed this one to 0.001, only the backdrop is going to be affected because that was the active object when I changed this value. So yeah, just a little tip, hold Alt when you've got multiple things selected and then put in your value to change all of the values at the same time. Now if I go back and watch my simulation again, we could see that it hits that a hell of a lot nicer, hits this one a hell of a lot nicer. Perfect. So now we have our first two cubes set up. The rest of the animation process is literally just duplicating these cubes, watching where the ball's going to hit, and just adjusting the cubes to where you want them. So yeah, with this technique, it's not exactly hard. I wouldn't call this hard at all. It's just tedious because you've got to wait for the simulation each time, and then, you know, you're duplicating a ball, putting it into where you roughly think is the place, and just, you know, simulations aren't the quickest things ever. However, this is far, far easier than animating a ball, following a curve, and deforming on each bounce. It does it all for you. It's free real estate. Now with my animation, I'm just trying to make sure that the ball moves as smoothly as possible. I don't really want it bouncing on the same block a few times or whatever. So what I'm doing for that is, like, say when it hits this one, I'm just putting more, I'm just rotating them more so that it's sending them in one direction or another, instead of, like, you know, if I was to put this flat, it's probably going to bounce on it a couple times or whatever. Now, of course, with this, you don't even have to use cubes if you don't want to. I'm just using cubes for the sake of simplicity. But you can play with the shapes, do what you want. Just try and avoid shapes that are going to send your ball off in unpredictable directions. Just bear in mind the curvature of the shapes that you're using, because with these, they're all flat edges, so it's not going to send it backwards or forwards in any way. It's just bouncing left and right. So for this animation, I'm pretty much happy with how the ball is bouncing around the scene. I'm not wanting to go too crazy with it. I'm just wanting to keep it simple for this tutorial. There is also a little glitch that can happen sometimes, which it hasn't happened in this one, but I'm going to try and recreate it just for in case it does happen. So sometimes if you have a thinner object like this, I'm not sure if this will even happen here. Nah, it's still working pretty nice in this case. But sometimes with a thinner object, I mean, that's what's happening here. The ball will clip through the object, and then because it's a collision, the part that's clipped through, it's trying not to clip back through, and it just gets messy. It's not nice. So what I would do, if you have any of your cubes like eating the ball up and like the ball getting stuck inside it, I would come to your thickness outer and just try changing this, just turn it up marginally to like 0.005 or something, and just slowly turn it up till you can see that the ball is actually hitting it still, but it's not going straight through it or anything. Okay, so here we go. You can see that I have that issue here where it's being eaten up. So what I'm going to do here is just turn the thickness up to 0.005. And I'll also apply the rotation and scale on it just to be doubly sure. Okay, so I'm just going to see how it reacts here. And it's still eating it up. I'm not exactly sure why, but it's not too much of an issue. You can try playing with the thickness outer and everything, but sometimes it just doesn't work. So what I'm actually going to do in this case is just delete it. And I know this one's working, so I'm just going to duplicate it, put it back there again. I mean, it's the same as what I did before, only now I can make sure that it's actually working properly. I'm just going to scale it in like that a little bit, just to add some visual interest. Go back to about here somewhere, press play, and yeah, that's working nicely. So now we near enough have the entire animation set up. I'm just going to add a little exit hole down here for the ball to enter into. Of course, you don't have to make this a looping animation. You could just have it as a non-looping animation. So to create the hole, I'm just going to add a mesh, make a cylinder, go to the settings a bit and turn this up to 64 so that it's nice and dense. I'm then going to shade smooth, and I'm going to scale it down to roughly the size that I want it and where the ball is going to be hitting. So I'm going to say about this. I want it to like fit into the hole nicely. So then with the cylinder in place, shaded smooth and scaled, I'm then going to select the backdrop, come to my modifiers, add a Boolean modifier, use the eyedropper, and just select the cylinder. Now with that done, I can just apply the Boolean straight away with Control A, get the cylinder and delete it. Now we've got a hole in the ground, but it just looks a little weird with it clearly being a 2D plane. So I'm going to go into edge mode and extrude my edges all the way down. Now I'm not going to stress about the topology of this backdrop too much because it's really not important. However, I am just going to apply the rotation and scale of it, come back into edit mode, select this edge and just add a little bevel to it just so that it adds some visual interest. It's not just a sharp hole in the ground. And I forgot to mention earlier, if this whole process of just watching the ball is too slow for you, there is a way that you can do it marginally quicker, but you don't get a preview of where the ball is going. So I would only recommend doing this once you know the ball is set up how you want it and you're just finishing little tweaks. So the way that we do this is we select the object with the cloth simulation on, we go to the physics tab, and we scroll all the way down till you see cache. Now here you can change the simulation start and end times, but I'm making mine 250 frames long anyway, so I don't need to change this. And all you need to do is just hit bake. Now when you hit bake, you'll see your timeline with this blue bar growing on it. This is just the simulation calculating. Obviously you don't get a preview in this mode, but it makes it marginally quicker. So if you know you have everything set up right, then you know, do this. It'll save you a few seconds each time. And with the cache properly baked now, if I press play, it plays smooth and in real time. Like so. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but the ball actually bounces a little bit before it bounces into the hole. And I'm okay with that, but you can see it clipping through, which isn't great. So I'm going to go to my thickness outer on the backdrop, and I'm going to change that to 0.005. That's good enough. The only problem with this now, which is a little annoying, is I've already baked everything. So if I just press play, it's not going to take that change into effect. So I'll have to go down to my cache settings on my cloth simulation again, delete bake, or delete all bakes just to be safe, and then bake again. Now with my simulation baked, I can see that the ball is not clipping through the floor and is actually bouncing off the sides of this, which looks quite nice. So that is all of the animation set up. All we have to do now is play with the camera settings to get it looping nicely and play with the lighting and materials. So all we're going to do to get the camera set up is go back to frame 1, make sure you've got the camera selected, hit I, and add a keyframe for the location. Next, we're going to go to the frame where the ball hits the floor, which is here. I'm going to do it just before it hits the floor, actually. And then come into my camera view with numpad 0, bring my camera all the way down to about here, I'm happy with. And then I'm just going to press I, add another keyframe for my location. Now you might need to adjust your camera so that it's moving in time with the ball, or you know, maybe just put more things in front of the ball if it's going too quick. But this now is pretty much all of the camera motion done. All we need to do is we need to make sure that we select this keyframe for the camera being at the floor. I'm going to duplicate it and just move it along a little bit. So this is going to be the time that the camera just sits on the floor before it pans back up. So I'm going to make it pan back up about here, I think. Now that I have the camera set up, moving all the way down, and it's got this little bit of a pause here, I can grab the original keyframe, duplicate it, and move it all the way to the end. And what that means is, once I get past this keyframe, the camera's just going to go back to its original position, which then means that the animation loops if we watch it back. Like so. Now the camera motion is all set up, however I'm just going to add little bits to it just to give it some more personality. For example, I've got the camera moving straight down. That looks nice. We've got the pause. And it's going to start moving back up. But then it's paused there for a second before it goes back to the first frame. And that just helps it loop a little bit better. Because if your camera gets to here, and then it's going to go straight back down again, it's a little bit noticeable. See if we can see it here. It's actually worked out pretty well in that case, I won't lie. But either way, I still want a little bit of a pause when the camera gets back to the original position. So I'm going to move my end keyframe back a little bit so that it just stays in place. Now, another elephant in the room that I probably should have addressed right at the start of the video. I like to have my shading tab here, but what I'm going to do is come up to my shading editor, and I'm going to change my shading editor to the graph editor. Now that I've got the graph editor open, I'm going to put my cursor over here, press N just to give myself a little bit more room, and bring this one over a little bit. Now all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to drag out these ends of the curves a little bit, or just scale them on the X, and this just gives a cooler effect to how the camera moves. It doesn't look so boring, just straight up and down. It's a bit more momentum to it. It doesn't really work on the down because you want it following the ball. However, on the camera going back up, to add a little bit more visual interest to it than it just going straight back up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this handle and I'm going to just drag it along its X a little bit. I'm then going to grab this handle and move this along its X a little bit. And as you can see, this just creates a nice one of them. So now if we watch the camera, it's just got a little bit more visual interest to it. And I think what I'm even going to do is bring this one back. Do something like this so that it starts to pan up quickly and then slows down over time. It like eases out the panning. So let's see what it's like. Yeah, I like that. Okay, yeah, so I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to go back to my first frame, and obviously this backdrop isn't right, so I'm just going to grab this and just drag it up to wherever fits, and you know, that fits. It's great. And now we're on to the final steps, which is adding lighting and materials. So I'm just going to change my graph editor back to my shader editor, and I'm going to change this to rendered view. Now you can go as crazy as you want with the lights, but I'm really not going to go crazy with the lights. I'm just going to do a simple light setup. I'm going to start with like sort of a fill light at the top. I'm then going to duplicate it and rotate it by 90 degrees on the y-axis so that I can have a light coming in from the side like so. I'm going to move it to the side and move it along the z-axis so that it's somewhere that I like it. I'm going to duplicate it, move it down the z-axis so that we've got the light spread out more evenly. Now with both of these lights, I'm going to select them both, duplicate them, and rotate them on the z-axis by 180 degrees, and then move them along the x-axis just to put them at the other side. And now we have nice full lighting, I guess. Obviously adjust the settings to however you want them. I'm going to make the sides a little bit darker, like so. I'm also going to grab this top light and duplicate it, bring it back on the y-axis a bit, so that we have a little bit of light on the front of the cubes. For the most part for the lighting, I'm just going to stick with that. Next, I'm going to come down to a frame where my ball is like bouncing off of stuff, and I'm going to select my ball, go to materials, click new, name it if you want, it doesn't really matter. And I'm just going to play with the settings how I want them. So I want a nice shiny ball, and the base color I'm going to make, I'm going to make it green. Yeah, that's nice, I like that. For the backdrop, I'm just going to make a really simple gradient texture. So I'm going to go to texture, new, come to my BSDF, zoom in a load, search, gradient texture, add that, search, color ramp, add that. And then with Node Wrangler enabled, I'm going to make sure that I have this gradient texture selected, press Ctrl T to get the mapping node and everything. I'm going to select the color, hook it up to the factor, get this color, put it into the base color. Now the gradient is working on the wrong side to what I want it, so I'm going to go over to my mapping node and change the Y rotation by 90 degrees. Now it's got this gradient. So I'm just going to come over to my color ramp and I'm just going to pick two colors. Okay, so I'm happy with those colors. Then I'm going to come over to the roughness, just play with that a little bit, get somewhere that I like it. Yeah, sort of reflective, not too reflective. Thing is, you don't want your backdrop to be too reflective, because if I turn the roughness all the way down and put it back to frame 1, you're then going to see reflections of where the ball's coming in and everything, and this is like fine for the beginning, but then when we get to the final frame, it's going to come back up, there's going to be no ball, and then one's just going to appear when it loops back again. So, you know, you don't want to break the looping part with the roughness of your backdrop. So I just like to turn my roughness up enough just so that you're not breaking that immersion, or if you are, it's only slightly. So I've just adjusted my backdrop color just the tiniest bit, made it a little bit more pink. And I'm actually going to come to the Y location. I think it's the Y location. Let's find out. It is not the Y location. X location? It is the X location. And I'm just going to slightly adjust this to get the gradient more where I want it. Because if you bring these two together, it's going to make the mix a lot harsher. So I like to keep it soft and just move it up to a place where I like it. So next I'm going to make a material for all the cubes, but I'm going to have a node set up so that it'll change the color of them randomly. And it's really easy to set up. I'll show you how to do that now. First, you are going to want to make a material, name it if you want, I don't care. We're going to come over to the shading tab and search for an object info. Now with the object info node, you can see this random on the bottom, and that's what we're wanting. So now I'm just going to input a color ramp, if I can spell. I'm going to hook the random up to the factor and the color into the base color. Now you can already see what this is doing somewhat, but let's add some more colors to it. So if I get the black value, I'm just going to turn this up to a yellowy mustard color. Going to add another point. I'm going to make that one pink. Going to get this white point. Going to make that like purple, I guess. And now I've just realized that I didn't even put the material on everything else. So I'm going to shift click everything that I want the material on. Shift click the one that has the material last. Hit Control L, and I'm going to link materials. Now you can see that each time that I duplicate one of these, it's just going to be a random color from the color ramp that I've set up. But with the color ramp at the minute, it's set up to linear. If you want it to be either one of these colors or another and not like a mix of somewhere in between, you can set this to constant, and now it will either be one of these colors or it won't. Turn that up a little bit. So yeah, there you go. That's how you can get like exact colors, or just change the blending type to get whatever shades you want. Now I'm just going to play with my colors a little bit because I'm not too happy with them. A bit boring. Gonna change my backdrop color to, I don't know, something. And I'm also going to turn down the roughness on these cubes just because I think it looks nice with them being reflective. With this backdrop that I moved back here, I'm just going to rotate it on the x-axis a little bit, down a little bit, maybe rotate it a little bit more and turn it up a little bit, just so that we got some nicer light down at the bottom, because it was getting a bit dark. Now, I'm not too thrilled with the colors, but I'm fine with that. That's the least of my worries for this tutorial. I will go over a few other little things just to add some more visual interest. One thing that we could do to improve the light in a bunch is go to the World tab, select this yellow button on color, go to environment texture, open, and add a HDRI. Now I've found a HDRI that I like, but it's blown my exposure way out, so I'm going to go into my render tab, go down to color management. I'm just going to turn my exposure down slowly until I get it to where I want. And I'm going to do the same with the gamma actually, just to make the colors come through a bit more. And then under look, I'm going to change my look to high contrast just to make the colors pop a hell of a lot more. Now another thing that we can do is if we come up to the camera options and turn on depth of field, I can then use the eyedropper and select the sphere that says cube. And I'm going to turn the f-stop down to something, well, I'm going to turn it all the way down to start with, and then I'm going to slowly turn it up till I find a point that I like. It's not making everything too blurry, but you can see that these objects aren't so in focus, like at the top or bottom. I think I'm happy with that. Let me just go to here. I'm just gonna go to a point where the ball is about here. And I'm gonna hit render, or F12. I sometimes like to just render out a single frame from any random point in the animation, because then you get a better idea of how everything looks. Like say here for instance, I'll render a frame out. I mean, this was a bit of a boring frame to render out, I can't lie, but it is what it is. So I actually just went back and changed my focal length to 32 millimeters, but now I'm at the bottom, this doesn't work. So I'm just going to grab this edge And I'm just going to grab it out on the y-axis till it's not causing any issues for me. And I think the final thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my render settings. I'm going to come down to motion blur and turn that on. But then this is a really good point where you should go through and render out single frames, because like here, for instance, there is no motion blur. Yet if I render this out, I can guarantee there's going to be motion blur, quite a lot of it, and I don't want that much. Motion blur is great and everything, but if you have too much, it can just make the ball look a little weird. So for the shutter speed, I'm just going to turn that down to 0.17. Yeah, so I'm happy with the motion blur, and that is, it's really subtle. Yeah, I like that. Like an idiot, I just realized that because I changed my focal length too much, it's not actually loopable because the ball is shown at the start. So I'm just going to go back to my camera options and just zoom in enough that the ball isn't visible at the start, but I'm still happy with it. 40mm is good enough. That'll do for me. So yeah, I'm happy with this. This side's a little empty, but I guess that's just my fault for just not focusing on this side. I was just trying not to mess everything up. Of course, this entire time I've been playing it in cycles. I have no idea why. You could just have this in random view here, and you know, makes it a lot easier to see everything that's going on, and it plays a hell of a lot smoother. This is playing at 24 frames a second, so this is what the animation will look like once it's rendered out. Okay, for the render settings, I mean, it's render settings, do what you want, really, I guess. But I'm just going to set mine to 1920 by 1080. I'm just going to set it at that. I don't want it 4K or anything. And because we're rendering out a video, I always suggest to render it out in frames first and then add it as an image sequence later, because 9 times out of 10, if you start rendering a video in Blender, you're going to leave your computer for an hour, come back, and Blender's not even going to be open when you come back because it's crashed. So if we're just rendering out frames, we don't have to worry about Blender crashing because it's trying to do too much. So you can export this out as PNGs or JPEGs or OpenEXR if you've got a bigger hard drive than me. This is all down to personal preference though. This is how good you want your animation to look. It's down to you, down to your machine, I guess. And then for the output, you can just click this little folder here and select where you want all the frames to go. I'm not going to do that because of how I have OBS set up. It's just not even going to show this box when I open it. I also want to add that you can, of course, play with your max samples and everything to get the render looking as good as you want, or just rendering out as quick as you want. But again, this is all personal preference. This is completely down to you and your machine. So once you've picked where you want your frames to go, just hit Control and F12 or go up to render and render animation and wait for all of your frames to render out. Okay, so once all your frames are rendered out, you're going to want to go up and save your project, do whatever you want. And you then want to go to New and Video Editing. Once the Video Editing tab is open, what we're going to do is go to Add and go down to Image Sequence. Now, I didn't actually render out my animation because it was going to take an hour or so, and there's no point when I already have 2 rendered out. But when you add an image sequence, it's going to come in like this. It might be backwards. If it is, no worries. Just come up to Video and reverse frames, and then it's backwards for me now. But you could make it backwards if you want. But I'm going to have mine playing forwards, and you can see this is gorgeous. I'm going to change the output so that I know where the video is going and it's not just going into my temp folder. So with all of that said, you now know how to set up a perfect looping animation of a bouncing ball. You could set this up in multiple other scenarios as well. This is just the simplest scenario that I could put it in without the ball going crazy and having to do a load of troubleshooting. Originally I did have it set up so that the ball was attached to a constraint, and I thought it was working. It seemed like it was working, but then I recorded this tutorial and it didn't work. So if I can figure that out, how you can get the ball to like be locked to one axis so that it can't be moving forwards and backwards, I'm gonna try my hardest to work that out, and if people are interested, I can make a video on that if and when I work that out. So I hope this video helped. If it did help, please leave a like down below and a comment. If you do make any animations out of this, I'd love to see them. So if you do post them anywhere, please tag me. My Instagram will be linked down below. And of course, if anyone has any issues, just comment below what the issue is and I'll try my best to help. See you now.